Okay, here's the question. What is our local, authentic, continental language in Africa for us as Africans? Now, Africa became independent starting in 1957, with Ghana being the firstborn of independent Africa. You know, Ghana is a country in West Africa that is used to be called the Gold Coast under the colonial British rule. On the other hand, South Africa is the lastborn of independent Africa since it got its freedom in 1994 and is located on the southern part of the African continent next to Zimbabwe. However, my greatest concern is whether Africa is really independent or dependent. Apparently, they say the world, since globalization in the early 1990s, has become interdependent. So how can Africa be independent in such an interdependent world? Are we able to remove the shackles of colonialism? Anyways, let's talk about language in Africa. Look, Africa was colonized by different so-called powers, with a large part of the continent ruled by Britain, France taking another considerable part, especially West Africa. And Portugal, Germany, and the Netherlands were present in the continent. And after almost a century of colonial rule across the continent, the colonizers' language was imposed on the colonized, in this case, the Africans. Fast forward to this present day. Now, Africa is independent. And the most critical question is, why are we as Africans still using colonial languages, most depressingly as national languages and official languages in our respective countries? To this day, we are still conversing in foreign and colonial languages in our respective countries, trapped by colonial borders. Are we so compromised that we even appreciate theirs, not even our local, authentic African languages? See, language brings and solidifies identity, but see what happens with us. As Africans, you'll be surprised that the moment you leave your colonially set borders, you will lose your local African languages. Once you cross the border into South Africa from Botswana, from Mozambique to Zimbabwe, Ghana to Togo, Niger to Nigeria, Kenya to Somalia, even Tanzania to Ethiopia, you must switch to a colonial language for you to speak and communicate with your fellow Africans. Either you switch to English, to French, Portuguese, Spanish, Arabic, German, different languages. Even we call them borders, they are not even colonial borders. They're isolation strategies. Some Africans even speak 3 to 4 languages fluently, but none of those 3 or 4 are African languages. Yet, language brings a strong sense of identity. And not speaking our local African languages means they aren't our identity. What a pity. Even a famous Kenyan African scholar, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, you need to check him out, a great scholar. He once said that if you know all the languages of the world, but not your mother tongue, that is enslavement. Knowing your mother tongue and all other languages too is empowerment in itself. From a very early stage, we are coerced to learn foreign languages to the point that we even refer to or group our very own languages, African languages, as vernacular. How can our very own natural languages be classified as vernacular, which means they are secondary to the colonial languages that we speak now? Remember the greatest African civilizations, empires, kingdoms, the richest person to ever live on earth from Mali, Mansa Musa, and many other mathematical and scientific contributions that were made by Africans long before colonization were all done through Africa's vernacular, Africa's local languages as the medium of communication. The same African languages or vernacular languages that were spoken by our forefathers who built some of the greatest inventions, formulas, great architectures, the Great Zimbabwe, Benin Empire, Mandinga Empire, different civilizations that even today's scientists and archaeologists could not even explain. But they were using our local African languages. Shockingly, in some settings like our schools in Africa, when you speak any other language different from the colonial language, at times you are even punished for speaking the vernacular or local languages. As if that is not enough, we have even used the ability to speak a colonial language fluently as a yardstick of one's intelligence. Africa. We are even praising ourselves for speaking a colonial language than speaking our African language. Professor Chilembembe, a Cameroonian great scholar, you need to check him out as well. He once said that use English but don't let English use you. The same applies to French. Use French but don't let French language use you. So we need to be in control of our languages, But can you see how disconnected we are from our identity? Why don't we have our own African continental language? Where is that discussion amongst ourselves? Where is that discussion amongst us as Africans? How many times has one of our greatest thinkers, Professor PLO Lumumba of Kenya, stressed the need for an African continental language to enable us to run our affairs? You see, the issue is that fluence, comprehension, even flexibility when using a colonial language are less than in a native language. So, for example, if you look at across Africa, there is no single subject that is taught or written in a native language in African schools, from math, science, geography, history, agriculture, medicine, biology, chemistry, and so on and so forth. Then we say we seek development, yet we learn in colonial languages, yet the former colonial countries learn in their languages. In other countries outside of Africa, they use local languages in their schools, at work, and in everything that is important to them as a people, while they only use English if necessary in the social arena, especially when they are interacting with non-locals. You see, when you go to their countries, you are obliged to learn and speak their own languages. Even the best publications, news outlets, and activities of these countries outside of Africa are even carried out in their own languages. Yet, we have remained attached to their languages here in Africa. And what is most disturbing is that we even use it in the most critical areas and departments of our lives that are crucial to our development. For example, in our governments, in parliaments, education, and institutions, you see. Even when you are learning your mother tongue, your local language, they are explaining it in English so that you understand it. We only use our local and indigenous languages in social spaces, in less critical areas that do not contribute much to our development as a continent. Even many speak Swahili on the continent. So, for us, why not Swahili instead of English and French? Is it a better sacrifice to adopt and keep a colonial language than to accept an African language for ourselves and the betterment of our continent? Let's have this discussion as Africans. Subscribe, like, and share. Let's awaken our motherland. I'm yours, Mukundi. Yeah.